All right, today we're diving into a really controversial book by Texxe Marrs called Blood Covenant with Destiny. Now, just to be clear, we're not here to agree or disagree. Our goal is just to break down the author's worldview using his own arguments. So let's jump right in. Wow. Okay, so right out of the gate, the author puts it all on the table. This quote, it's not just a tagline. It's basically the mission statement for the entire book. You have to see everything that comes next through this lens because it's all building towards this one single goal. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the central thesis. Then we'll get into how he tries to prove it by looking at sacred texts, a secret history he lays out, and finally, what he calls the prophetic endgame. All right, first up, the central thesis. The author calls it a covenant with death. Sounds intense, right? Let's unpack what he actually means by that. Okay, so this right here, this is absolutely crucial to understanding his whole argument. He starts by completely redefining Judaism. He claims it's not based on the Old Testament. Instead, he says it comes from the Babylonian Talmud and the Kabbalah, which he calls man-made books written by rabbis. You really have to get this distinction because his entire theory hinges on it. And that redefinition leads directly to this, the book's core argument. He asserts that because of this foundation in the Talmud and Kabbalah, Judaism is actually a satanic religion. And not just that, but one with a detailed plan for global domination, that so-called covenant with death. The entire rest of the book is just him trying to lay out the evidence for this. So you might be asking, how in the world does he even try to support a claim like that? Well, his first pillar of proof is his interpretation of sacred texts, and he really zeroes in on the Kabbalah and the number 666. Now, according to the author, the Kabbalah isn't just some dusty old set of mystical teachings. No, he frames it as a literal handbook for magic, a secret blueprint that he claims is the foundation for groups like the Illuminati and the Freemasons. It's the wellspring of their occult power in his telling. And then there's this number, 666. For most people, that number means one thing, right? Evil. But the author claims that within the Kabbalistic system he's describing, it's actually seen as a positive, powerful symbol. And to back this up, he pulls this quote from an Ask the Rabbi source. His argument is that far from being a mark of the beast, the number 666 in Kabbalah represents the perfection of the world. So for him, this is a smoking gun, proof that it's a symbol for their ultimate goal of a new world order. It gets even deeper. The author then lays out what he calls the Kabbalah's pantheon. He says there's this unknowable God, Ein Sof, then a father and a mother, a son and a daughter. It's a whole family of gods. But the real kicker, according to him, is the holy serpent Leviathan, who he claims is worshipped as the actual Redeemer. Okay, so after the textual arguments, he moves on to his next big pillar, history. But this isn't the history you learned in school. He presents a secret history of power, centered around what he calls the synagogue of Satan. The entire foundation for this secret history comes from these two verses in the book of Revelation. He takes them completely literally. For him, this is biblical proof that there's a group of people who say they are Jews, but are not. He argues this refers to modern Jews, framing them as an imposter group. And with that interpretation as a starting point, he builds this historical timeline. It's a lot. He claims it all starts in the 8th century with the pagan Khazars converting to Judaism. He says they are the ancestors of most modern Jews. Then he connects them to Lenin and Trotsky creating communism in 1917, then to the founding of Israel in 1948, and he says the final goal is to start World War III to achieve global domination. It's a single, unbroken line of conspiracy spanning centuries. And to really hammer home that connection between Judaism and communism, he uses this specific quote, which he attributes to a rabbi, Harry Wotton. He presents this as Exhibit A. See? A Jewish source supposedly admitting that the communist soul is the soul of Judaism. For his narrative, this is a crucial piece of evidence. Okay, so all of this, the texts, the secret history, it all leads to this, the final section, the prophetic endgame. This is where the author describes the ultimate goal of the whole conspiracy and how he believes it's all going to come crashing down. At the heart of this endgame is a concept called Tikkun Olam. Now, many people understand this to mean repairing the world, but the author says, nope,
That's code. He claims it actually means world conquest. He redefines it as the plan to build a Jewish utopia, which he describes as a global dictatorship run by Talmudic law, with all the world's wealth in their control.
So what about everyone else? What happens to non-Jews or Gentiles in this utopia? Well, according to the author, it's pretty grim. He lays out a stark choice: renounce your religion, like Christianity, or face the consequences. He claims that under something called the Noahide laws, anyone who refuses will be put to death by beheading. And if you comply, you become a servant to your new masters.
And just to really drive that point home, he uses this quote he attributes to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. It's incredibly provocative. He presents it as the ultimate proof that Gentiles exist only to serve Jews, comparing them to donkeys. For him, this confirms the whole master-slave dynamic he's been describing.
And here's where he brings it all together with Christian prophecy. He argues that the Messiah that Judaism is waiting for is in fact the Antichrist from the book of Revelation. This figure, he says, will eventually sit in a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem and declare that he is God. But he says this new world order won't last forever. In his telling, there's a divine judgment coming. He calls it the 10 afflictions, and he frames it as God's final punishment for this centuries-long rebellion. And he wraps up the entire book with his interpretation of a biblical parable. You've got the householder, who is God. He has a vineyard. The husbandmen, who the author says are the Jews, get miserably destroyed for their actions. And the vineyard, the kingdom itself, it gets taken away and given to other husbandmen, who he identifies as the Christians. That's his final word on the matter. So when you step back and look at it, what the author has built is a complete, self-contained worldview. Everything fits. Every historical event, every sacred text, every prophecy, it all points to a single unified conclusion. And that leaves us with a bigger question, one that goes way beyond just this one book. What is it about these grand, all-encompassing narratives that can be so influential? How do stories that promise to connect all the dots gain so much power? It's definitely something worth thinking about.